All right, well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for our Conservation Innovation Grant training. It appears that the majority of the traffic has stopped, so we will go ahead and kick this in gear. My name is Brian Zielinski. I am currently serving as the Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships here in Florida, out of our state office in Gainesville. As you may have already guessed, I will in fact be your moderator for today's call, and will certainly do my best to keep us on track with regards to the agenda and the allotted time frame. We certainly hope this training will be both educational and useful for you, specific to your interest in our state Conservation Innovation Grant funding opportunity. And I will also briefly touch on several national CIG funding opportunities as well for your understanding. Shifting gears, want to provide just a brief overview here of the agenda and the road ahead, and certainly the ground we would like to cover with you during our time together this morning. Our state conservationist, Juan Hernandez, has been able to join us this morning, and he will provide a formal welcome and some opening remarks as well. Thanks again for joining, Juan. Then I will go ahead and segue into an introduction to Conservation Innovation Grants. And as previously mentioned, it will be primarily focused on our state CIG opportunity, but I will also touch on the several national CIG opportunities for understanding as well. We will then move into an overview of the resource priorities and concerns, which will be led by Nathan Fickert, our state resource conservationist. Then we will discuss a little bit about our EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, eligibility requirements. And Ms. Amber Till, our Assistant State Conservationist for Financial Assistance Programs, will take the lead in that segment. And then we will have Ms. Denise Liggett, who is a Management Analyst for Partnerships, discuss the application process and requirements, before I come back around full circle and go ahead and provide some closing remarks at the end of the call. So before we dig in, a couple housekeeping items to cover. I mentioned earlier, but appreciate everybody keeping their lines muted until we get to the Q&A sessions, and then certainly very interested to hear feedback and questions that everybody might have, and your engagement. If in fact you would like to receive a copy of today's slide presentation and or recording of the meeting, please go ahead and enter your name, title, organization, and email address in the chat box, and I will make sure to provide that information. Note that we will also be posting the webinar recording on our Florida NRCS website as well for you to access. We will have multiple opportunities for questions. Q&A will be provided at the end of each segment within the presentation. You can certainly also enter a question into the chat box, and I will do my best to keep track of that with multiple screens going here and also facilitating the call. You can also use the raise hand feature via WebEx down there in let's see, I think usually that's on your panel there in terms of options. And of course, if you're only participating by phone and not utilizing the WebEx platform, you can select *6 to unmute your line during the Q&A sessions. Please do note that the webinar is being recorded and will be made available as mentioned. And then also note that by attending this webinar, you are consenting to being included in the recording. So with that, I believe that wraps us up in terms of the housekeeping items. So without further ado, I would like to formally introduce our Florida State Conservationist, Mr. Juan Hernandez, to provide us some opening remarks. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for being on the call. I really appreciate your interest on the Conservation Innovation Grants. In fact, last year was our first time in I believe, almost a decade that we offer the Conservation Innovation Grant in the state of Florida. And it is my intent, so you know, to continue to maintain some level of funding to the greatest extent possible to continue to afford this opportunity to our partners. And the reality is that, in my opinion, the Conservation Innovation Grant really are the most humbling way to tell folks we don't have all the answers, and we don't claim to have all the answers. The reality is that how I explain sometimes when people come to us, hey, can you help us do X, Y, and Z? And when I tell them that that practice is not in our shelf, quote unquote, and I always offer them this opportunity with the Conservation Innovation Grant. And that's what it is about, is the reality is to find solutions and alternatives to that we don't have in our shelf. And that's what I eventually am always envisioning and looking forward of some of these proposals, so that eventually we can incorporate them into our status quo delivery of practices, so that we have means to improve our practices, our scenarios, and how we actually implement and deliver conservation in the state of Florida. So I want you to continue to encourage and talk to your peers and continue the interest into the Conservation Innovation Grant. I'm really excited to the projects that we funded last year. I already visited one of them, by the way. It's going to be a really interesting project of cooling down a high tunnel in the southern part of Florida. So that I'm already looking forward to the outcome of that particular one. And I am going to the greatest extent possible to continue to visit other proposals that we funded last year. But with that, I'm absolutely looking forward for these years and see what ideas and proposals we get from these requests for proposals. But with that, I will yield the floor back to Brian, and thank you very much for the call, and have a great day all. Thank you, Brian.
Most welcome, Juan. Thank you for those opening remarks. Very much appreciated. And I think that certainly kicks things off in a very positive way in terms of desired outcome specific to today's webinar. So much appreciated.
And if I may, then I will step out. I'm visiting my field offices, and right now I'm in Bonifay, so that I want to continue to visit with the field offices, but I will step back from the call. So have a great day and enjoy the call with the staff. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Juan. Have a great day as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just keep my camera off moving forward in the hopes of preventing any technical difficulties. So let's go ahead and dig in. So again, my name is Brian Zielinski, and I'm currently serving as the Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships. And I do want to go ahead and provide some introductory information as it relates to CIG, some of the background, and also the opportunities that are available to you. Conservation innovation grants are competitive grants that drive public and private sector innovation in resource conservation. Development and adoption of innovative conservation approaches and technologies in conjunction with agricultural production. Note that CIG projects are expected to lead to the transfer of conservation technologies, management systems, and innovative approaches, such as market-based systems, to agricultural producers, into government technical manuals and guides, and/or to the private sector. CIG projects also often inspire creative problem solving that boosts production on farms, ranches, and private forests. Ultimately, they improve water quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat. Conservation innovation grants typically fund pilot projects, field demonstrations, and also on-farm trials or conservation research. There are three main types of CIG, all of which are based on a competitive process. Classic, which is under the national umbrella, as is the on-farm trials. And then, of course, you have the state CIG, which again is going to be the primary focus of today's webinar. So a bit more in terms of the national opportunities here. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of information I can provide at this time. because the majority of it is to be determined, as you can see here, both to classic and the on-farm trials. What I have heard specific to this information from our national office is there will likely be some additional information coming, either a late spring or early summer rollout. That is as much detail as I can provide at the current time for your understanding. But please do make note of the link provided here so you can stay apprised of any additional updates as they are made available on our national USDA NRCS website. So specific to our state CIG opportunity, I do want to provide just a brief overview here as far as some of the guidelines and specifics. Do note that the deadline to submit an application is going to be Wednesday, August 31st, 2022. The resource priorities for the state are inclusive of climate resilience, grazing, soil health, and urban agriculture. And we will in fact hear a bit more about these in more detail shortly from our state resource conservationist, Nathan Fickert. In terms of eligible entities, these would be inclusive of all US-based non-federal entities and or individuals that are eligible to apply for projects carried out in the US. Total funding available for this year and funding cycle is $900,000 with an individual award floor of $25,000 and an individual award ceiling of $250,000. In terms of cost share, applicants contribute a 1-to-1 match, but do note that historically underserved applicants may provide 25% of total project costs. And I'll speak a little bit more to historically underserved here in a minute as far as additional detail and definition. Do note that match can be inclusive of both cash and in-kind contributions. For example, volunteer work in terms of the in-kind or donation of supplies, facilities, or equipment. And that project duration or tenure spans anywhere between 1 to 3 years. Continuing on the overview, the application for CIG will in fact need to be submitted through grants.gov. And you can see the opportunity number here provided along with the direct link to grants.gov and being able to find that funding opportunity. Getting back to the historically underserved component that I mentioned a minute ago, do note that up to 10% of the total funding is set aside for proposals from historically underserved producers, veteran farmers or ranchers, or community-based organizations comprised of or representing these entities. Definitions specific to these producer types can in fact be found by searching for 7 CFR, which is Code of Federal Regulations 1466.3. But a little more information there. Historically underserved producer typically means a person, joint operation, legal entity, or Indian tribe who is a beginning farmer or rancher, socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, or limited resource farmer or rancher. Do note that the grant agreement itself, upon award, does not include substantial involvement from NRCS when carrying out activities or implementation. So, i.e., if selected for funding and NRCS enters into agreement with you, we certainly are available for guidance and assistance via producer meetings as far as eligibility and environmental compliance and some of the other components that we need to check the boxes on, if you will. But the awardee is in fact expected to take the lead role in project completion and implementation. So a quick overview of some dates and timelines as it relates to the state CIG. Again, as mentioned previously, the deadline is going to be Wednesday, August 31, 2022. We do then anticipate a selection date of Friday, September 30 of 2022. Agreements to be signed at the end of the calendar year around Friday, December 30th of 22. And then ultimately an anticipated start date as far as projects and implementation on Monday, January 16th of 2023. So again, this kind of gives you a broad view of what that timeline looks like from application to anticipated selection, a signed agreement, and then actually moving things forward on the ground in terms of implementation. So with that, I will go ahead and stop there and see if we have any questions out there among the group that hopefully I will be able to answer. Does anyone have any questions in terms of the ground that I have covered as far as the introduction, background, some of the guidelines and criteria? Of course, we will be sharing additional detail as we continue through the PowerPoint as well. But yes, please let me know if you have any initial questions at this juncture. Okay, well, hearing none, again, we will certainly have more opportunities as the presentation moves on for Q&A. So if you don't think of a question tied to this portion until a little bit later, feel free to roll it in as we continue to forge ahead. So moving to the next part of the presentation, I would like to introduce Mr. Nathan Fickert, our state resource conservationist, to cover some ground on our CIG resource priorities and concerns. Nathan, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Nathan Fickert. I'm the State Resource Conservationist, NRCS in Florida. I'm just going to broadly cover a few of the general resource concern priorities, and then some, possible more specific resource concerns and practices that might be used to address them. I would not call my resource concern and practice list all inclusive. So if there are other ideas and opportunities out there, I would encourage people to look for that. I'm just trying to give some ideas and get the ball rolling. So with that, the first one we're going to cover is climate resilience. Sure, we've all heard about that and those concerns. As NRCS, addressing all number of resource concerns that we can. This is a priority to us. And so we are looking for, CIG proposals that use our conservation practices to address this. So next slide, Brian. So more specific resource concerns that could be related to climate resilience, air quality emissions, weather resilience, inefficient energy use, and again, there could be others. And possible conservation practices to address this would be energy efficient agricultural operations, combustion system improvement, cover crops, prescribed grazing, and energy efficient building envelopes. So anything that addresses carbon sequestration or reducing emissions with any level of agricultural operations could be a potential here. Next slide. Grazing is obviously another big topic in Florida, and it is something that we at NRCS work a lot with. There is a lot of technology out there. It changes almost every day that could help how livestock producers manage grazing. Anything from GPS collars to how we graze near and in riparian areas using technology, all sorts of things. So this is a good opportunity to perhaps find other innovative tools for data collection and management, and demonstrate the importance of those items to grazing land management. And again, we'd like to find those new tools and what are innovative producers working with to help improve grain and pasture land conditions and improve grazing. Next slide. Integrated plant condition. Terrestrial
Nathan,
habitat.
we lost you a little bit.
I think somebody's on.
Yeah, folks could just make sure their lines are muted so we don't get any feedback. That would be great. Thank you.
Livestock production limitations, soil quality, and sediment, nutrient, and pesticide loss. When we say that term, we mean any loss of those items from fields to the air, to water, to other areas where we don't want the sediment, nutrient, and pesticides to accumulate. And again, possible conservation practices: prescribed grazing, pasture hayland planting, nutrient management, brush management, and herbaceous weed treatment. All right, next slide. Soil health, that's another big topic I'm sure most of us on here have heard of and are aware of the issues there. Referred to as soil quality sometimes. It's defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So here again, any innovative ideas on cover crops, crop rotations, could be soil moisture management, soil water holding capacity ideas, anything that could impact soil health, the quality of the soil environment, and also help then with plant productivity and health. So next slide. So here again, it could be pest pressure, insects, or herbaceous species, soil quality limitations, wind and water erosion, concentrated erosion, and possible conservation practices, cover crops, conservation crop rotation, residue management, and no-till, and could be others as well. This is a big one with a lot of opportunity for innovative conservation practices. All right, Brian, next slide, please. And the last main one I'm going to cover is urban agriculture. Again, if you are not aware, NRCS is moving into the world of urban agriculture, trying to assist at all levels how to come up with, again, innovative ways for crop production in and near urban areas. And this is a wide open topic as well. This could be soils, this could be pesticides, nutrients, water consumption, etc. So next slide. Sediment, nutrient, pesticide loss. Again, losing those items to, could be sewer systems, could be runoff systems, soil quality in those areas. It could be toxicity in soils because of previous use in urban areas. Pest pressure, source water depletion. Water is a big deal in many urban areas. How are we efficiently using that? Do we need to collect water from other sources, etc.? And then storage and handling of any pollutants. Typically with agriculture, there's fertilizers, pesticides, etc. used. How are we safely storing those items in urban areas? And again, possible conservation practices: integrated pest management, nutrient management, irrigation systems. That could include reservoirs and storage, irrigation water management, high tunnels, cover crop. And again, this one could be pretty wide open in regards to whatever innovative projects or uses people could come up. I believe that's my last slide. So are there any questions? Oh, okay, and then just kind of overall, the proposals must address at least one of these resource concern categories listed below. All right, now I think it's questions.
Any questions from the group for Nathan? I do see that we have a few questions coming into the chat. What I may do is just hold off on those until we get towards the end and cycle back through. I think that'll probably be a more streamlined approach, if okay with all. But yeah, specific to the information and detail that Nathan provided for our resource priorities and concerns identified for our state CIG funding opportunity, feel free to unmute and go live if you would like to ask a question or put anything in the chat as well.
If a topic or your innovation idea covers a criteria that is across multiple of the option, not necessarily options, but the categories, is that more likely to be accepted, or do you want something very, very specific?
I would say that's a good question. The purpose of CIG is to come up with, well, typically I've seen specific projects to target one or two things. That doesn't mean you couldn't address more items, but I would say the more you can show you're addressing whatever items you choose well, those are the projects I would think we would want to focus on.
All right. In more detail, pest pressure comes up in multiple of the categories.
Mhm.
So something that addresses pest pressure would, even though it covers multiple categories, I'm just not quite sure if you want like climate resilient specific pest pressure, or you can address pest pressure that crosses the board. For example.
And again, I would say if you can show your project is going to be an innovative approach and address the issue well, that's going to be the key point, more so on here's how I'm addressing climate resiliency with pest pressure. And again, that would be fine if the project shows how someone's going to achieve that goal. But again, I would just say, can you show something is going to be innovative, a unique way to do something, and do it well.
Thank you.
Yep. And Brian, I guess if you don't mind, Brian, I see a couple others. We might as well just address them. The one I wanted to come back to that I saw was
it
indoor. Yeah, indoor agriculture
Yep.
qualify for urban ag. So with NRCS and our resource concerns, we have to be able to tie those to agricultural production in the ground or in the soil, so to speak. Now, that can have some multiple ways to interpret that, but we do have to be able to tie it back to the ground. So typically, NRCS hasn't, let's take high tunnels, for example. Currently, our high tunnel standard says anything grown in there has to be in the natural soil. So we don't do raised beds in our high tunnels according to our current standard. That said, if someone can show this is a way we're going to do agriculture in an urban setting and it ties back to a resource concern in the ground in this way, then there is potential for that to be eligible. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's kind of one of those classic non-answers, but I think if a proposal could show that, we could look at that as being a good project.
Nathan, I do see another one in the chat here that's tied to the discussion and the urban ag question. Is there a space requirement for an urban agricultural proposal?
There's really not. We at NRCS have tried very hard to kind of rethink how we look at the scale of agricultural operations. We haven't done a lot of work in urban settings to this point as NRCS, but we are definitely very open-minded when it comes to size and scale of urban agriculture, realizing that you don't have the space that you do out in more rural settings. So no limit. Again, being able to show that your project is innovative and will address the issue are going to be the key points.
Excellent. And I'll tell you what, we do seem to be getting some more questions in the chat than live. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to scroll back up and get some of these addressed so we don't get too much of a backlog here as we move into the presentation a little bit further.
I'm going to grab this tech transfer question from Aaron, I believe.
You dropped out. Oh, now you're back.
Okay, absolutely. UAV approaches to technology could definitely be part of this. How do we monitor? How do we, maybe it's grazing operations, maybe it's how we implement practices through UAVs or something along those lines. So that could certainly be part of it within a proposal.
Absolutely. Let me scroll back up here. Okay, is a minority serving public university such as Florida International University or FIU considered as HU or historically underserved?
I'm gonna let
Amber take that one.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that one. Let Amber come back to that. More of an eligibility question. Yeah.
Okay. Amber, do you want to go ahead and address that one if you would?
I would say I will want to revisit the CIG notice of funding to verify my answer. However, typically NRCS, the process of HU determination, it's actually a self-certification process by an applicant. That's typical to our other programs. Brian, I'm just going to take a look at the notice of funding to verify any additional guidance that might be in there. And I can bring that up in my slides, in the section for my slides.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. And let's see, I think the last one I've got up here, is there a quota on the historically underserved awards, or are awards based on the content and quality of the proposal? So I'll take a shot at this one. Based on the understanding, again, that there is 10% held back, or up to 10% that would be specific to HU. I would tend to look at this as in terms of total dollars versus number of proposals, right? Because you could certainly have one proposal that could eat up that entire 10%. So I guess I think about this more in total dollars and that 10% criteria versus total numbers. Amber or Nathan, if you've got anything else to add on that, feel free.
Nothing additional on my side. I must say that I was searching for the question about HU criteria, so I did miss your explanation. I apologize.
Okay, okay. Well, I will do some additional digging there too, just to make sure that I haven't overlooked anything. But again, all great questions, and appreciate everybody's engagement as far as getting those into the chat, and or again, providing some questions live in real time, if you will. So please keep those coming. Let me scroll back down, make sure we don't have any more in the chat box. Okay, so I think we are caught up to this point. So we can go ahead and segue into the next portion of the presentation. And again, we are going to cover some ground here on our EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, eligibility requirements. And Miss Amber Till, our Assistant State Conservationist for Financial Assistance Programs, will go ahead and take the lead. Amber, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see. So I think we just have to frame up this particular program, Conservation Innovative Grants. The funding is sourced through our EQIP program, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And given that, there must be EQIP-eligible producers involved in CIG projects. The primary awardee for CIG does not have to be EQIP-eligible, and all producers involved in a CIG project are not required to be EQIP-eligible. Just some producers must be EQIP-eligible. And I'm just going to add a little note here. It does say participating producers are not required to have an EQIP contract. The payment process is handled through the grantee, and we can talk about requirements for reporting those payments a little bit later. Next slide, Brian. So what are EQIP eligibility requirements? The very first, most basic criteria is going to be that a producer has farm records established with Farm Service Agency. Farm Service Agency is our sister agency here in the USDA. In addition, the producer needs to be a person, legal entity, joint operation, Indian tribe, or native corporation who is engaged in agricultural production or forestry management. And lastly, control of land. The producer has to have demonstrated control of land involved in the CIG project for the term of their involvement. So these are three very basic criteria. The next slide, Brian. The next set of requirements are more certifications. We have to meet requirements for highly erodible land and wetland conservation, or more specifically, the producer must. In addition, there's a $900,000 average adjusted gross income limitation for funding under EQIP, and a producer that is participating in a CIG project would need to also meet that 900,000 AGI limitation. The next two forms are relative to who is involved in the operation, right? They're farm operating plans. We have two different forms. It depends on if you're an individual operating that farm, or if it's an entity or a joint operation. And if it's a joint operation or an entity, that operating plan is going to describe the members of that operation. So these certifications are also requirements in addition to the previous three, right? Established farm records, control of land, and be in ag production or forestry management. In some cases, there's some other eligibility documents that could be required. Sometimes signature authority is demonstrated outside of our form. 901 or 902. Next slide. So typically, EQIP has payment limitations of $450,000. And for SIG, it doesn't affect a producer's payment limitations. So if that producer is involved in a SIG project and they receive a payment, that payment does not impact their EQIP payment limitation. Next slide. All right, so duplicative payments. Any payment from USDA that producers receiving for the same practice would be duplicative. So that's direct or indirect payments. So if a producer has a contract with NRCS to do, say, prescribed grazing, if the SIG project is relative to innovative grazing management and the identified practice is prescribed grazing, that could be identified as a duplicative payment. So examples of the programs under USDA would be, we have other programs called Conservation Reserve Program, of course, EQIP, and we also have CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program. All right, next slide. All right, so these are some requirements relative to reporting. So as a SIG grantee, you would be required to submit semi-annual progress reports with a list of all of your EQIP-eligible producers involved in your project, the dollar amount of those payments to those producers or entities, and a self-certification indicating that each individual or entity receiving that payment is in compliance with EQIP eligibility requirements. So that's kind of, I'm going to just focus on that last bullet for a second. How are you as a SIG grantee going to make those determinations? NRCS can work with you. We work on a day-to-day basis with our sister agency, Farm Service Agency. And, you know, as part of the process for managing that grant with you, we can help you in capturing that information so that you can provide your report. Okay, I think those are the last slides for EQIP requirements. And I can just follow up on the HU question real quick, Brian.
That'd be great.
On page 20 of the SIG notice of funding is section F. It says declaration of historically underserved and veteran farmers and ranchers. And so it identifies categories for different HU categories. And I would say this, that this section does not also explain what is an HU producer. Producers would need to self-certify that they are historically underserved, and I'm verifying. I believe the best approach is anyone interested or intending to submit an application as an HU SIG applicant or producers involved in the project that are HU is to just work with Brian, and he can work with me. You can also reach out to me directly. I must say that SIG applicants that are HU is a bit new. For EQIP, we have an application that captures that information very straightforward. For SIG, it may be a little bit more gray, and we may need to help you and guide you along that way. So feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Brian. if you have very specific questions about identifying HU status. I think that's the best I can do, Brian.
Okay. No, and I think that's great and appreciate that, Amber. I would just add two other things there, just to reaffirm, right, that information you were sharing was directly out of the notice of funding opportunity for the state CIG. And then also, I would just share with the group as it relates to HU, and that I say that status or that criteria, do note that, that is something that is very important for us to track on our end as well, as we work with partners with these SIG projects, in terms of, the percentage of individuals, that do fall under that HU category. So just wanted to add those two things. All right, Amber, looks like we've got a question here in the chat. Let's see. Or, well, maybe a couple here. Hold on. Make sure I'm going back up to the most current. Okay. Let's see. Could you clarify, can the proposed project be limited to non-EQIP private property, say a field station, or does the project need to include at least one external producer that is EQIP? And it says EQIP question mark, but I'm not sure if the meaning there is EQIP eligible.
I'm going to assume the question is, must EQIP eligible producers be involved in a SIG project? And that answer is yes, you must include in the project at least, some EQIP eligible producers in the project. All producers involved do not need to be EQIP eligible. However, some do. So if your question is one, well, is that could equal some.
Yes, and that was the intent of the question. Yeah, so Aaron just verified. So thank you. Yep, so bullseye on that one, Amber, much appreciated. And let's see, got another one here. Can Florida non-permanent residents apply if the project is to be developed in Florida? And then also, will a newly opened company farm, no income or products on the market, be eligible for the grant?
So I think the section that I am covering is very specific to the EQIP eligibility requirements for producers participating in a project. I think the first question is, can Florida non-permanent residents apply? So does that mean that can non-Florida residents apply as a grantee, as an applicant? I would defer to you, Brian, on that one.
And we can probably go ahead and defer that one to the next section when we cover application and and requirements, and we can work with Denise to cover that ground. But yeah, knowing that the project would be specific to Florida or Florida centric.
And okay, so question number 2 is, I'm just going to reiterate, will a newly opened company farm, no income or products on the market, be eligible for the grant? So there is, two layers here. We have the applicant for the grant, and we have those producers that are involved in the project. So I would need to understand if the question is who's applying for the grant or who's participating in the grant. I'm just going to make an assumption that the question is relative to who's participating in the grant. And if a producer meets eligibility requirements that we identified earlier, they establish their farm records, they are an individual engaged in agricultural production or forestry management, they have control of land for the term of the project, and they also have submitted and verified their HEL requirements, their AGI requirements, their farm operating plan, and perhaps any other eligibility documents. If all of those, right, result in a eligible producer, the status, the timeline of how long you've been in production and how much income from those products is not a criteria. So the criteria is really just a function of, do you have farm records? Do you have control of land? Are you an individual or entity, joint operations, etc., tribe, native corporation, etc., engaged in agricultural production? And you've submitted all your certifications, and those have come out meeting requirements. I hope that answers the question.
All right, well, thank you very much, Amber, much appreciated. And I do see a follow-up here to the FIU or Florida International University question early on, i.e., university or institutions potentially falling under that HU umbrella. And it looks like, and I'm going to say Ali, hopefully I pronounce your name right, from FIU. There was additional information on page 20, section F, item 4, that mentioned minority serving institutions as HU. So yeah, it looked like there was some additional information there in the funding opportunity.
Thank you, Brian.
You bet. Well, much appreciated. And again, thanks to all for the continued great questions and follow-up, both live and in the chat. So to keep this ship moving, let's go ahead and segue here to the final portion of our presentation. And Ms. Denise Liggett, who again is our management analyst for partnerships and programs here within partnerships. She is going to bring us down the home stretch as it relates to CIG application process and requirements. So Ms. Denise, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, this first slide, I just wanted to point out how you can go and search for the Notice of Funding Opportunity in grants.gov. You'll just type in the opportunity number there in the search box. And then once you get there, you'll go to get the details, including the announcement, you'll go to related documents, and then you can pull up a PDF version to download or print or whatever you want to do with it there. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over the application, the grants.gov account registration, applying for the opportunity, the content and form submission, and then the required application forms in these next few slides. So next slide, please. Okay, can't stress enough to start early. You must have a grants.gov account to apply for state CIG, and there are several steps to setting up that account. It can take a couple of weeks. And an important note to mention is that Florida NRCS, we cannot help with the technical issues under grants.gov. So any questions will need to be directed to the grants.gov support email or the 800 number. Next slide, please. Okay, just getting into the steps to register. So you must obtain a UEI number. That is a unique entity ID number. And you would obtain that number by registering with SAM, System for Award Management. Your SAM registration is going to take a few weeks to come back. So that's why I'm saying to start early. Once you have your EUI number and your SAM from your SAM registration, then you can register for a grants.gov account, and that can happen in the same day. As part of your registration, you'll be adding your organization applicant profile, and finally setting up your point of contact authorized profile roles. That would be those folks that are developing the proposal, reviewing, and then signing the proposal. And next slide, please. Okay, so when you get into grants.gov, you're going to create a workspace. So you'll set up a workspace, and the workspace is the shared online environment where members of the grant team can simultaneously access and edit different web forms within the application or proposal. Creating a workspace allows you to complete the application online, route it through your organization for review, and then finally submitting it through the Workspace. You can add participants and work on the application together and complete all the required forms online as well. An application can be submitted through Workspace by clicking the Sign and Submit button. And grants.gov recommends you submit the application at least 24 to 48 hours in advance of the closing date to provide you with time to correct any potential technical issues. So once submitted, the application will be giving a number that can be used to track the status. Next slide, please. Content and form of the application. There are several requirements for the actual application, and all of this in detail is listed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. But I just want to quickly review. You'll start with a cover page that's going to include basic project information, such as the applicant name, the proposed start date, project title, various contacts, the federal funds requested and matching contribution of non-federal funds, and just a very brief description. The project abstract is a way to describe in non-technical terms the issue you are looking to address, the objective, the innovative approach and main deliverables provided, and importantly, how success will be evaluated. The project narrative, this is the meat of the project, up to 15 pages should be provided. Detailed information about the project, design, goals and objectives, presented outcomes, benefits, estimate of eligible producers if they have been identified. Team qualifications. So we don't want resumes, but more of what the team members involved, backgrounds or contributions will be toward the project. Assessment of environmental impacts. Depending on types of activities you are proposing, identify protected environmental impacts will be. What will those be? Because this is federal funding, activities are subject to the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA. NRCS is required to do environmental assessments for CIG, particularly if ground disturbing activities are going on. So you should cover in your application so we know in advance what these environmental impacts may be. A declaration of previous CIG projects and involvement in past performance should be noted, and declaration of historically underserved and veteran farmers or ranchers. If applying under these categories, then a declaration is required. And there is an example of this declaration in the Notice of Funding Opportunity in the attachments. This declaration would look like, and what it would look like. So 10% of funding can be set aside, and this would reduce your one-to-one match down to 25% of federal costs. I might mention too, and this might answer the previous question, but 10% of funding has been set aside for historically underserved applicants for the project. Next slide, please. Then finally, you will also be required to submit application forms. The SF-424 application for federal financial assistance and the 424A for budget information is, if you look under forms on the grants.gov site, it's the SF-424 family. And I want to point out there are also instructions located there for completing the form. You'll have a budget table, which would be an Excel spreadsheet, and then a budget narrative. The Notice of Funding Opportunity includes examples of what these look like, but the narrative covers both federal funds and partner matching funds and how they will be utilized. A combination, if applicable, combination of cash and in-kind contributions and cost share must be committed at the time of your application via a letter outlining the exact amount. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, it must be active to be considered and must be attached at the time of application. If you have a de minimis cost share agreement in place, which is 10% cost rate, a copy of that agreement should be included. And finally, there is an opportunity to ask for the de minimis cost rate. This would have to be requested as part of the application packet. Letters of support for the project from individuals or entities who are not project partners may be submitted and should be placed at the very end of the application package. And many examples of these documents and forms can be found at the end of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So it's a good idea to take a look at those examples. Next slide, please. And I'm very happy to introduce Lynn Milheiser. She's a grants management specialist with USDA Farm Production and Conservation Business Center. And Lynn is able to join us today to provide some additional guidance on Grants 101 training and answer any particular questions about the application process. Lynn?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, so this has been a great presentation. First and foremost, kudos to Florida for pulling the webinar together. My role is, I posted the NOFO and I will be retrieving the applications off of grants.gov and providing a zip file to NRCS when the applications have been received. So just a very quick, just a minute or two here on the SAM or grants.gov. If you have not actively registered, that should be step number one. The legal entity that might be applying for the funding should immediately go to grants.gov and make application, because that registration must be active when you apply for the award. The August 31st deadline is a hard deadline. So you must apply through grants.gov, and it has to be submitted in full by 11:59 p.m. in grants.gov. If you wait till midnight on August 31st, the system won't accept it. So just a heads up that you need to get there before 11:59 p.m. is how the NOFO responds to that. The NOFO full announcement is on grants.gov, as Denise and Brian have indicated. In addition to that full announcement, and Denise talked about these, there are some separate or related documents that you want to take advantage of. So there is what we refer to as appendices A through D, which basically is an application package checklist. There is strong budget narrative guidance, because your budget narrative is key to a successful application. So quantifiable, verifiable, necessary to accomplish the program activities. And the guidance there, that happens to be Appendix B, tells you exactly how to quantify that in your budget narrative. I also want to say that the 424 form, the 424A form, along with that budget narrative, everything has to be consistent in your application documentation. So your amounts by line item. So your 424A form will break out what the possible funding categories will be in your budget narrative. So your budget narrative and the 424A must exactly align. You've got so much personnel, so much fringe, so much travel, so much supplies. That all has to be consistent across the board with your narrative, your 424A, and also the 424, which will include dates. So those three items will include dates, and you'll find that the Florida NOFO is looking at a start date of 1/16/23, and your project duration can be 1 to 3 years. So all of the dates in those forms and in your narrative all have to be consistent in order for your application to be reviewed and deemed eligible and complete. So there is a checklist in the related documents. There's the budget narrative guidance. There are some sample commitment letters in there that you can choose to use or not, but it gives you a sense of, kind of what we're looking for in terms of match commitment letters. And then, as Denise indicated, there are some instructions on how to properly complete the SF 424 and the SF 424A, and there are examples in there as well. So I think that's the three items I wanted to mention. And then the fourth item is that Grants 101 training. So you will see a link in the announcement on grants.gov. You'll see the Grants 101 link. It's excellent training for anyone considering applying for and administering, managing a federal grant. So there are 5 modules. They're pretty intense. They're pretty deep modules, but if you take it bit by bit, it talks about the laws and the regulations behind these awards. It talks about administrative and management requirements for the recipient of federal funds. It talks about the cost principles that are behind what's eligible and not eligible in terms of applying for funding. And it even talks about some risk management pieces as well, and even single audits. So even if you took a look at a couple of those modules, it'll give you a sense of kind of the responsibility behind managing federal funds. It's excellent training. And if you take it in pieces, it's manageable. So that's all that I have. I'm glad to be part of this process. I used to be a renewable energy and energy efficiency. I helped to fund projects on farms, anaerobic digesters, manure to methane type projects, reduction of greenhouse gases. And I'm glad to be just touching this a little bit in my new role with the Business Center. Thanks so much.
Lynn, can't thank you enough for being able to join us this morning. Very helpful information, very informative. So again, many thanks, and a very good compliment in terms of what Denise shared and the baseline provided as far as the application and requirements. So with that, I do not see any additional questions yet in the chat, but would formally call out if folks do have any additional questions specific to the application process and or requirements. Go ahead and please share those now so we can have Ms. Denise and Ms. Lynn address those as applicable. All right, well, I don't see anything coming into the chat, but I will keep my eye on it here as we get closer to the finish line. So again, much appreciate that, both Denise and Lynn. So shifting gears, I would just share real quick for folks to keep this in mind as it relates to, again, staying apprised, specific to email updates, and that you can go ahead and sign up for these updates on our website. And again, you know, this will provide you a lot of information, of course, not only CIG centric, but otherwise in terms of our farm bill programs, you know, batching dates, application periods, other initiatives that, you know, are being rolled out in terms of urban agriculture, among other things. So no doubt a great resource to take advantage of. As long as you don't mind getting a few more emails within that inbox. So I did just want to mention that briefly. And as we work to hit the finish line, if you will, I would just offer some closing remarks. And that would be certainly many thanks today for everybody joining the webinar for our Florida Conservation Innovation Grant training, and your interest and engagement during the call, which has been absolutely fantastic. And again, much appreciated. Also would like to say a special thank you to my colleagues here in Florida with NRCS for their tag team approach and teamwork to go ahead and pull off this webinar for you, and the input and what they were able to provide. I would also say, or just a reminder, that the webinar recording will be posted to our Florida NRCS website for additional reference. And I did see that a lot of folks had provided their contact information in the chat. So I will be sure to start sharing the slide deck and or the recording as well as requested. Also would say, please note that we do have a second CIG webinar scheduled for Wednesday, June 1st at 10 a.m. in case there's any other questions that may come up between now and then, or you may want to rejoin, but would certainly also say, please help us spread the word about this great opportunity. And that we certainly do look forward to working with you in the days ahead. And finally, would go ahead and also share, I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information in the chat. So everybody will have that, and no problem for me to take the lead based on questions or any type of follow-up. And if it is centric to one of the other segments within the presentation, I can certainly work with Nathan or Amber or Denise or Lynn as needed to go ahead and get you an answer and get back to you as soon as possible. So with that, unless there's any other questions, I would say again, many thanks for your attendance and engagement today, and certainly hope you have a great rest of the day and a great week. Thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.